Contact. All right, folks, what do you say we prolong the misery and do part 2 on this 98 Valkyrie? Let's get right to it. No, your eyes are not deceiving you. The carbs are back in. I'm filming this intro later on. I did film an intro, but it sucked, so I wanted to redo it. Before I close down for the day, I might as well do that so I can kind of catch up my editing for video 2. Remember video 1, we left off with the carbs being split. Video 2, I'm going to start off showing you just a little bit of disassembly stuff, a little bit. Then we're going to move on, basically jump right into reassembly of the carbs because I did all the cleaning and so forth off camera. And I'm going to cover a few different things in some detail on that. I know guys like some of that detail in regards to the carb innards. How I test a few things on this one, how I test the, the air cut valves, yeah, I hope I shot that, and how I test the float bowl gasket integrity, things like that. So we're going to get into that, including a pressure test. There was a little question about that, which you'll see in this video. Then that'll bring us pretty much up to where we're at right now. Still waiting on the band clamps for the air box. Other than that, we got pretty much everything done except one vacuum hose that I was fiddling with just now, and that's going to take me about 2 minutes to do. Let's go ahead and get into this video, and we'll catch you downstream when we get up to this point in this video. I guess we're at one point, we're going to be at another point. See you then. Okay, your mileage may vary, but this is how I do it. Sometimes I use bins. Today I'm going to use bags. And each carb part, with the exception of the float bowls, because they're all exactly the same, go into each individual bag. The air cut valve, the back of the carb, this intake funnel, and that way I know number 1 is all together with number 1. Does it really matter? Probably not, because all the internals on these carbs are pretty much the same, including the floats. I just like to do it this way because it just appeals to my sense of organization. And you could throw everything into a big bin if you wanted to, kind of like a candy bowl at Halloween. Throw it all in there if you want. And then when I go to clean and things like that, I just take them and I can, at that point, do one carb at a time. We'll just buzz through this, and if I see anything or think of anything, I'll mention it at that time. That slow jet, by the way, is a number 35. See if we can just get the main out this way. It's hard to read, but the main jet looks like it's a 100. These are KN numbers, obviously. That seems a little small. Well, 105 would be about right, but it's a California bike and it ran good before. Take the emulsion tube out. This is a 7mm wrench. The little thing inside there, which is actually called a needle jet, well, you can't see it from there. The little top hat guy that comes up through there where the needle goes, you can kind of see that little brass piece down in there. Again, that's called a needle jet. Now on some carbs that pops out and the emulsion tube is what keeps it in. That's really only going to be the case though when the emulsion tube goes straight up into that body. In this case it is pressed in, it ain't going to go anywhere. So you can kind of see it better from this angle down in the top, and that's how they installed it. That's it right down inside there. Also of note, the needle seat for the float is pressed in, so it's non-replaceable. I imagine there's a way to do it, but all I do is clean them up, as you've seen me do it many times before, with Q-tips and some Brasso, and make it nice and polished. So the rubber tip of the new float needles has a nice place to sit that isn't all rough. And we take the back side of the carb off, the intake side. By the way, I'm taking them apart under power, but I do not put them back together under power. Always do that by hand so I can feel it. That and the gasket. We're going to reuse these because, again, they're very expensive and I have never seen these in bad shape. So I think they're going to be fine. A lot of these OEM parts on these Hondas are actually pretty good. Yep, these are in fine shape. Last but not least, the air cut valve. Now the air cut valve is put in at the factory with a self-drilling screw. I'm assuming it's the K in factory where they make these things. It's a self-drilling, self-tapping screw. So I saw them on his website and I went ahead and ordered them. Can't overemphasize the importance of this, making sure it seals up properly and this thing is working right. All 6 carb bodies are done, all 6 float bowls are done. We'll show you the float bowls here in a minute. We'll just go ahead and take, what is this, number 5 right here. As far as the float seat goes, because the float seat is pressed in, I clean these with Brasso and Q-tips. You just got to be careful with Q-tips because they leave fibers. So you got to flush it out and blow it out with compressed air when you're done. Naturally, the rest of it's all done and I ultrasonic the whole thing, but that's not where it stops. Once these things, of course, are immersed in a water-based solution, what I end up doing is I go inside these bores here, right where the butterfly meets the side of the bore, and I puddle up some WD-40, kind of like this. Make sure it just kind of puddles around that, that butterfly shaft, that trunnion shaft, if you will, and then move it back and forth. I do it on both sides, try to work some of the WD-40 in there because WD with that water displacement characteristics works really well, and I've never had one seize up. And then I spray the outside too, any of these springs, try to get it down in these joints. As far as the face where the float bowl gasket goes, these get cleaned up thoroughly as well. Use whatever process you want. You have to watch out on any of these mating parts where there's an O-ring for scratching it because it will invite a leak. Not on this side usually, it's usually on the float bowl side. Like I said, we'll get to that here in a second. Something really important to highlight here is also the place where the fuel joints go in the side of the carb. Some carbs are through hole, depending on where it's located in the rack. This one in particular is. And you have a hole on both sides. You have to absolutely 100% make sure, and I'll zoom up here to show you what I mean, that hole is spotless. If it's got some corrosion in it, so be it, but you have to clean out any loose debris. Use whatever you want to use for it. Again, I use a small Dremel with really just a brass brush on the end of it to polish it out. You can also use some fine Scotch-Brite, just kind of swirl it around in there. You just want to clean where this mating surface is for the O-rings, because if you don't, you're going to invite leaks. Plus, it's going to be ultra hard to get them in. Some of these are very tight, not necessarily these, but some of the aftermarket fuel tees have to press in pretty hard, even with silicone grease. So you want to keep this as clean as possible for A, ease of assembly, and B, preventing any leaks. Because if there's any crap in here and you get an O-ring sliding over it, it's going to leak. So you have to do all 6 carbs that way. And I already did that. And while I was in there doing that, I cleaned these pins up. Now again, you can just take these pins out, and if you have an old Red Eye kit laying around, it comes with, well, you can actually buy these from his site, I saw that. It comes with nylon pins that are the same length as the short ones, which are on some of them. For example, here's a shorty, and the long ones like this. I just like to leave these in. These are a nightmare to get out. You're generally going to have to heat them or reach through and start tapping it with a drift. I don't want to bang on these carbs at all. I don't want to take a chance of cracking anything, breaking anything. These are in there. They can clean up fine. I think they're a lot stronger than the plastic ones. So what I end up doing on the inside, in this case I use a letter C drill bit. This is just on the inside of the steel pins, not on the inside of this entire bore, because this is counterbored about yay deep for the pin. Otherwise it's a smaller diameter. You'll drill through the aluminum. And I just go in here and I just clean a little bit of the rust out. And it's going to be fine because we're going to clean the bolts and we're going to layer them up with some grease. So that's going to be fine in the future. It's not going to be a problem. And you can kind of see down the bore right there that is not terribly bad at all. And I did the top. Actually, I must have missed this pin, but you do the top pins as well because some of these carbs have pins on the top and the bottom. So that's another thing that I have to do times 6. The final test, which I haven't done yet, is I blow through each port, including these air jets and all the circuits with brake clean or carb clean, and watch it come out where it normally comes out. That includes the enricher, which I forgot to mention earlier. This is the enricher jet. It's a pressed-in jet, not unlike the CB750s with a pressed-in slow jet. So this is your enricher jet right here. We'll blow through some carb clean, or in my case brake clean, that's all I got, and make sure at least it comes out up in here, and it also comes out on the top in here. This is your vacuum port for that enricher. So we got to make sure that all these circuits are clear, even the ones that the air cut valve goes into. Just see where it comes out, make sure it goes somewhere. If it doesn't go anywhere, you have to investigate that. The air jets are particularly problematic because one of them at least is very small, and if it's blocked off, that carb is not going to run properly on that particular circuit. Let's talk about float bowls now. Now this is an area that you got to be really concerned about when you take the goo and junk out of the float bowl, the O-ring groove. Now I'll show you a picture of what one looks like before, and of course this is what it looks like after. Now when you clean these grooves out, you want to stay away from using a metal pick tool or a metal scraper of any sort, because you can scratch the aluminum and that can invite a leak of the float bowl gasket. We're going to test that, and I said before I'm going to reuse some old ones because they're wicked expensive and they look perfectly fine. These are the ones that came out of it. They do not look perfectly fine, so we're definitely not using those, but I have some others that are much better. I'm going to show you here in a moment how we test that. What you want to do with this is use whatever you can as far as plastic. This is just a paintbrush you can get at the grocery store from like watercolor kit. Sharpen the end. You have to sharpen it over and over again. Put some brake clean on it, and you can run it around. You can also use a regular red straw from a spray can and just run it around. You can taper or crush the end of it to get into these little nooks and crannies. The brake clean does a really good job of softening that red gooey glue that Honda uses or KN uses to put the float bowl O-rings in, the original ones from the factory. So it does a really good job of softening that. It won't take it out completely, nor will the ultrasonic, but you want to avoid as much as you can using something metal. Now if you just can't get something out of a corner or something, if you're very careful, you can get into that corner. Just do the corner with like a pick tool, because the corner is now where this thing seals up against the O-ring. It seals up in the center, so you just can be very careful and do that. I'm not going to lie to you and say that I never do that, because I do it once in a while, and I did it on a few of these. But if you go into the corners only, inside and out, you really don't have much of a chance of compromising the ability for the O-ring to seal. So let's go ahead and I'll show you the test we use to make sure that the O-rings are going to work. Okay, here's our test rig for this. You use a Moto-Vac or similar brand, just as long as it's a vacuum pump. You can get this Harbor Freight, Amazon, wherever you want. A little piece of plexiglass. This is one of the ones from a Red Eye kit. I don't know if he sells these still. You may still have this available. It came in the big kit, which is unfortunately doesn't do anymore. But you can just go to the store, hardware or whatever, and just get yourself a little plexiglass. This is about 3/16 or a 1/4 inch thick. And then this tube here is one of the old Red Eye tubes. It goes from large to small with an adapter. You don't need that. You can just make your own, as long as it'll fit on the nipple, the drain nipple, nice and tight, and then it'll go on your Moto-Vac or whatever vacuum pump you're using, nice and tight. I was going to say Moto-Vac. Then you're going to be fine. Remember, this is one of the used float bowl gaskets that came off another one that looks perfectly fine. All 6 of them are like this. And if it passes this test, it's not going to leak. So if you say to yourself, well, I don't want to use used float bowl gaskets, you can do this test on any float bowl as long as you can get this to seat flat. There are 2 little dimples here. That's not a good pointer. One right there and one right there. So you have to put this glass up to those points. What we're going to do is we're just going to press down on it very firmly by hand, like this. Now I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to crack that drain screw. Now this assumes that the O-ring on the drain screw is okay. This is the old O-ring, so I don't know that, but it seems pretty good. Quick correction. In the original kit that Red Eye used to produce, he included this plate of glass and also a check valve you're supposed to put in line. And the check valve essentially eliminates the O-ring from the equation, because he wanted to focus on whether or not the glass would actually stick to the float bowl under suction. And that essentially was either a pass-fail part of that test. So now what we're going to do is we're just going to pull a vacuum holding this down and see if it holds a vacuum. We are testing the integrity of that O-ring in the groove, just like it would be screwed in to the float bowl, as close as we can. So if it's going to pass this test, it ain't going to leak. And right now we're at 10 millimeters of mercury vacuum, actually about 9.5. Let's go up to a little over 10. And you can see that we've got no leaking. We do this times 6 float bowls with these particular float bowl gaskets, which again are used, but if they pass this test, and I'm not holding that tight, in fact I should be able to let this go now and like turn it sideways, and it'll keep the glass on there because of the suction. So that's another part of this test. So we can do this, kind of wiggle it around and everything, and you know, Bob's your uncle. That's pretty good. So this guy right here passes this test no problem. So we got to do this 5 more times, which I'll do another day because this is just for demonstration purposes. We're not up to that point. So I'm going to do that for sure. I'm going to test all 6 again. I'm just showing you right now. But wait, there's more. Now I'm going to have to go through, which I'll do off camera, all the individual parts in those bags. So each carb is bagged up as far as its subsidiary or individual parts. Ultrasonically clean the parts that I need to do, blow out the jets, make sure the jets are open, you know, visually, and also, you know, make sure they pass, you know, pass gas. Once those are all done, we put them back in the bags. And then when I get all the parts in that I got on order, because I want to be able to do the air cut valves, I'll show you one of those at that time, and then I'll show you one reassembly of a complete carb at that point. And then I'll do all 6, or I should say the rest of the other 5. And then I'll show you the quick re-racking. I did that on the other video as well. That seemed to be really well liked by people. So, and then we'll be able to get them back on the bike. There's one other thing though I wanted to cover really quick. These manifolds, these manifold gaskets, these O-rings on the bottom here. The same rule applies in regards to cleaning up these O-rings. I think I've already done this one and the other one. I know it sounds like it's kind of anal and over the top, but this really is what you have to do to ensure that this thing gonna run properly. And if you do all this stuff and you got new parts, this thing is gonna run like it come off the assembly line. So every one of them I've done so far has been the same. So stand by for that, and we'll get back to it when we get back to it. We're on the last carb, and I want to show you some things about putting them back together that are specific primarily to these valve carbs, but a lot of this stuff is universal. One of the first things I do, which actually I haven't done yet in this carb, is to verify all the circuits are flowing. In particular, these air jets. Starting from the left and going down to the right, this is your enricher air jet, and then your main air jet, and then your slow air jet. This is a plug over here. So if you put something like brake clean or a carb clean through, you should be able to see it come out the place that it's supposed to come out. And you can figure that out as you go. So if I do it on the main jet one, I should get a dribble out the main jet and so forth. This is where the slow screw goes. Do the same thing. Although you really want to see this fluid flow from the air jet for the slow circuit all the way through and come out here. But it's going to come out here as well because this is a tap right here for the air cut valve that goes into the slow circuit. You can put your finger over that and then blow through it from the back and you'll see it squirt right out the slow, where the slow jet is. So just kind of blow it through and you'll see it squirt out. I'm going to go do that to verify because I've done it on all other 5, and I'll be right back. Okay, this passes all those tests, so it's very important that you verify on any carburetor that all the circuits are open, and that's how I do it. All right, so the first thing I'm going to do is work on the bottom of the carb here. I'm going to put the jets in. So I'm going to go with the standoff. Where's my parts? Oh, that's right, they're over here. I'm going to take my bag of number 6 carb parts and I'm going to dump them right in here, which is my paper plate. I like to use these paper plates for it. Now, so I want to take a look at our enricher, our emulsion tube here. Make sure that it's okay. And this one I cleaned up already. I already know it's good. So I'm going to install it. It takes a 7mm wrench. I like to put a little silicone on all this stuff. It's just silicone lube. Just helps stuff go in. Give it a snug. Doesn't have to be super tight. Main jet has already been checked and cleaned. Here's our slow jet. These are 35s. What I have here is not a reamer. I actually have a 14 thou pin gauge, and I determined that that's the diameter of a 35. And all I'm doing is making sure that the carburetor is, that the jet is clear. I'm just making sure that this is open. I'm not scratching it up. I'm not doing any damage to it. That just verifies that it's open. A couple of these I polished off with Brasso because they were real crusty around the bottom here where they sit in. You see the shiny part right there. That's where they sit down inside there, but these last few ones have been pretty good. So we just want to install our slow jet and a good snug. All right, so now we can just put the float in. So I'm putting new float valves in, float needles I should say, and these are the 188955s. They're the ones that I've always used. The float level is supposed to be 13.7 mil, or I think that's 540 thou imperial. These are a little bit higher. They're about 14 mil when you put them in, but it's close enough, and I've always used these. One thing to note is the ones that came out of this were perfectly fine and look brand new. So there's really nothing wrong with them. I'm just changing them out as a good practice. So we'll just kind of check that real quick. These are those float bowl O-rings that I'm going to use that are used, that are from a different job. I didn't just have these haphazardly laying around for the last year and a half. So this is that little box when Red Eye was selling these things, this is how they came. And so they've been protected and kept flat and not sitting out in the elements, and they really are in pristine condition. Maybe a little dust and stuff on them, but all I do with that is I just take and hit a little silicone spray with a microfiber and just lightly pull them through. There is nothing wrong with them. They're not flattened out one bit. These O-rings are kind of taller than they are wider anyway. Well, that's the best way to describe them, taller rather than wider. They're in perfect condition. I'm 100% sure these are OEM float bowl gaskets. I could get the aftermarket ones pretty easily. It's hit or miss on the OEM ones, and they're wicked expensive. I would have had to order them, like special order them from Partzilla. So we're going to go with these. No decay of the vacuum. Passes. We want to install that float bowl gasket and make sure that it's inside the groove. And here we go. Nice and tight. Don't forget to tighten the drain screw. Now while we're on the bottom of the carb, we're going to go ahead and do the slow screw. I have one right over here. These slow screws are, even though they're cleaned up in the ultrasonic, they're still pretty crusty. And I don't like crusty slow screws. They're difficult enough to reach, even with a Motion Pro tool. I don't want the damn things binding up. So I'm actually going, I've been doing this on all of them. This is the last one. We're going to polish this one up. And you'd be surprised how much junk comes off of these things. Remember, these have been modified. Somebody put a slot in them, but they are the D-head original equipment screws. I will caution you to use aftermarket slow screws in a Valkyrie carb, because I had a viewer contact me via email asking for a solution. He did that, and he put all 6 of them in, went to bottom them to turn them out a certain number of turns, and they were too long and a little tip. They broke off in the bottom of the hole there. And you can't just reach through like on other ones where it pokes into the main bore of the carburetor. These go into a different location. I told him, send me the carbs and I'll see what I can do, but he never did. I guess he figured something out, or he just bought another rack of. So that is something I do not recommend anybody do. Put the right stuff in. So I have the kit from Red Eye. He does sell this stuff still, which is the spring washer, and the proper O-rings for the slow screws. And it'll make your life a lot easier polishing them off like that. They'll be so much easier to get into and turn when they're in situ if they ain't all bound up. The factory manual says for a California model, the initial setting is backing it out 2 3/8 turns. You're supposed to do an idle drop test to finally set those up, but I've never been able to do that successfully in any Honda. It's kind of a convoluted test, so we're not going to do it. We're probably going to leave them just here, or maybe tweak them a little bit as needed. Anyway, next step, we're going to work on the air cut valve. That's very important. The components of the air cut valve are the valve itself and this little tiny fitting that takes the 2 small O-rings, and this one right here takes the 1 large O-ring that's in the kit. I want to test this valve. Now there is instructions, pretty detailed instructions that Red Eye Rich provides. I have my old copy still. He says that these valves will close these various ports. There's 2 main ports on here at around 15 inches of mercury. And I have never found one to close off more until about 18, and these are no different. So without any pressure on it at all, you blow into that long one that goes to the big O-ring. I'll do that right here. And air should pass. Now we're going to start pumping it up. We're testing 2 things. We want to make sure that the little diaphragm in there holds. There's no leaking, because that would be a vacuum leak, and it does. I'm going to pump it up to about 17, 18. Now you blow on it again, and it should close, which it does. So here we go. We're going to put this on that one, same hose. Now we can install it. And simply put the little ear for the screw toward the hole and shove it in, you know, just give it a shove. And tighten her up. All right, beauty. Now we're going to put a brand new 3.5 mil hose that goes from the vacuum port that supplies the air cut valve to the air cut valve itself. And you're not going to need, if you have the proper hose, you're not going to need any clamps or anything on it. So I try to get a little bit of silicone grease in on the places it's going to go. If it's the right size hose, it goes on tight. That's all you need to do, because it's the proper size hose and it's the proper hose. Here's the part number. All right, here's our diaphragm for number 6, and I did have them labeled as such and set aside, so I'm using the ones that came out of here. Now I want to talk about these diaphragm needles, okay? Really, they're needle jet needles. You want to make sure that these are the proper ones. If somebody has been in your carbs that you're working on and they've replaced these with aftermarket, 99 out of 100 times they're not going to work right. The aftermarket ones, even in a good kit, from my experiences, are incorrect. The only caveat to that, of course, would be if you have a Dynajet kits. They're usually pretty good, but then you have to do all the other stuff to accommodate those. So I have taken one of these out, and it does bear the correct number for after 97. 97 being the first year, and then 98 and on after that. So after 97, it's a 2JKR or something like that. Anyway, it is the correct jet needle. And I just wipe them off with some silicone spray. In an unmodified carburetor setup, you want the original needles, diaphragm needles. You don't want to be screwing around with aftermarkets in that. All right, so now that's seated in nicely. Cleaned up the plastic cap. Remember, the plastic cap is the main cap. The chrome is just decorative. Whoa, there's a spring. Whoa. Chrome one, kind of do a little fast switch hands. Done. So now all 6 carbs are complete. Time to start the re-racking procedure. I'm not going to go over this in a great amount of detail. Well, as I said before, plenty of videos, or there's plenty of coverage in my previous videos on this. I have them all laid out front to back. If you remember correctly, between 1 and 2 is that front bracket assembly. It's the one that's not chromed, and the very back is the chrome one. So you can save yourself some hassle by setting these guys aside, 1 and 2 right now, and just work on 4 and 6 and 3 and 5, because they go directly together. So you can put them together as a unit, set them aside, and then mate them with the other 2 carbs, or the last 2 carbs. The back carbs are the ones that have the fuel tees, the vent tees, and then there's a spring between the 2. Remember the one that goes over nut? I have those over here. Pardon me for reaching. I'm going to put these metal fuel tees on. They're available from Red Eye Tech. They were dirt cheap with the O-rings, so I couldn't say no. And they'll harden the system up. You know, these are the plastic ones. Usually they don't have a problem, but you know, they can crack. And you don't want anything cracking. That way the entire fuel rail will be aluminum or whatever material this is. So I'm going to turn it this way so I can kind of work on it better. These go like this, you know, on the bike obviously, but we're working on them this way. Actually, I'll go this way. I'll bring you over hither. Okay, so first thing I noticed when I picked up number 4 was the linkage for the crossover arm, the linkage arm, was bent a little bit, so I straightened that out. The linkage itself was bent too. I found that out too. I realized that this morning. Fortunately, I have a good way on the mill to just set it up and make sure it's straight, using the T-slots as a guide visually. So that was probably why the bearings went in this thing, is because it was bent. Probably when the previous owner took them out, he may have actually grabbed them or lifted them up from that upside down. The one on number 3 does not look bad. So this is the only one. The one on 3 is not like that, but we'll see how they line up. I can always fine tune those. What I want to do is I'm going to put some grease up on the, these come with Molly grease on them, but I'm going to put some silicone lube on the O-rings. Then T goes here, start one in, fuel T goes down here. So those are the only 2 things that go between them, and then of course the pins. Now what I'm going to do with the pins, well, in the spring, what I'm going to do with the pins is I'm going to put some Never sneeze on them. Be sure that they're not going to freeze up again. You know, there's an option of changing them. I have the plastic ones. I'm just choosing not to. There's 2 diameters of springs. The bigger ones go over the nut because the smaller ones won't fit. They can be a little fiddly when you go to put them in. And I'm sorry about the fan, but it's really hot today. Yeah, the fuel joint comes out the back like it wants to lay down on this mounting part of the casting. So that's where that goes, and this one just points up. You can clock them around, this one a little bit as you need, and this one too. But that feels really good. Don't go cray-cray playing with it. So we've got the spring in between. Paddles are in the right place. Sometimes when you put these carbs together, it gets behind there, and then you gotta take them apart and get it right. But now we got the opening for the springs, which goes right there. Do that later. And to keep these together, for now, we're just going to put a rubber band on them. And really, that's all you got to do on these carbs here, because everything else been installed is just the common things between them. Now we shove them over there, and I'm going to do 3 and 5. All right, here's our front bracket. Remember, it goes between the first carb and the latter 2. And I went ahead and put this in a Vaporest for a while, cleaned it up really good, dried it off and wiped it down with silicone spray. So this would be number 2. I've already got the goo on it. Now what I'm going to do on these is these are the original fuel joints, the straight fuel joints that came off. Kind of concerned about that groove. It's either corroded a little bit, or this one's a little worse, or somebody went in there at some point with a tool. I take these out with a plastic pick, so it wasn't me, but it looks like corrosion. And you know me and fuel joints, I don't like to mess around with them, so I went over to the lathe and I just banged 2 of these straight ones out. As I typically do, if you watch any of my midweek machining, I'm making these things. I make them longer usually because there's usually too much play. I don't like how much movement they have, lateral, where an O-ring can get closer to the edge than I like. So I made them 50 thou longer than the originals. Let's see if they work. We can always just use the originals if it's necessary. I think they're going to be fine. So we'll put the, I didn't do that yet. Let me put the new O-rings on the one I just made here. Shove it in a 4. We'll never sneeze in the hole. We put a smaller spring between these 2 guys here. I'll slip that one in as it gets closer because there ain't no nut to go over. So essentially I don't need to get a nut right now. You can see I can still move it back and forth just about maybe 40 thou. So that's pretty good. So a little over a mil. Not too shabby, daddy. And that takes care of the one whole bank already, except for all the details. There are a lot more detail stuff to put on, but we'll get to that here in a bit. I mean, I'm not going to show it all with you, but I'll get to it in a bit. Now, something I wanted to cover before, but I forgot until just now. Whenever you put these O-rings on these fuel tubes, fuel tees, or whatever, what you want to do is put a little grease on them. These have moly on them, but they're not that slippery. Then put the O-ring on, because the O-ring will roll and twist. So if it does that, don't despair. Don't even try to get back up. Put some grease on it, a little silicone lube. Turn the O-ring on the tee or the joint, and it'll straighten itself out. That's just something I've come across over the years. Now the really important thing to do right now, I'm going to do it off camera, is I'm going to get these fuel lines reestablished, the brand new ones, and then we got to do a pressure test upside down. We got to make sure this thing is okay, because no sense in going any further if there's a leak somewhere. All right, I had to hodgepodge a couple of fittings here to make this work with this big ass freaking heavy hose, but now we're at 4 psi. I got to go clean up the lathe, so you watch this while I'm doing that, and I'll come back here in a minute. A little bit of decay here, and I'm not really sure why. It really shouldn't go at all, but it could be in my setup too. So let me see if I got any leaks somewhere in my cuff or my hoses or my joints. Yeah, that's good. What you do at this point, normally I do this with the float bowls off, so I can flick them and let the air blow through them individually. Sometimes there's a little dust in there at where the tip sits, just the tip and just for a second. You just give it a shake like that, and it'll blow some of that air through there, depending on which carb it is. You can't really control that part, but it doesn't really matter. And then test it again. It's not going to necessarily hold patent 100% because it's not designed to hold air. It's designed to hold liquid. This is just a reference test. And this thing is pretty much solid, so I'm not going to worry about it. It'll be fine. All right, so here's the deal. I obviously pulled the float bowls off. I put the old float valves, the needles rather, back in because they really looked brand new, pristine. But as a good practice, I was just going to change them out with these K&Ls that I typically use for Valkyrie, 8955s. These K&Ls were bleeding down below 3 psi. There's definitely something wrong. So I blew each one of them out as I described before, and it did the same thing. I checked the fuel joints and the hoses in my rig with soapy water, no leaks. Now these are holding really well. So there's a little difference between those, and maybe these are just manufacturing variances on newer ones. I got these not too long ago. I'm almost positive these are the ones that Rich from Red Eye said to use. Maybe I bought the wrong ones. I'll have to go way back through my emails or re-email them and ask, but this is pretty solid around 4 psi now. And so this, any minor degradation of the pressure is fine. I mean, it was really kind of taking a nosedive before.
The other problems with the 8955s was the flow level. I could not get it down below 15 millimeters with any of those. And of course the tangs are not adjustable on these floats. But with the old float needles, it was like dead nuts at 13.7. So I really can't explain this one. I really don't understand why the K&L 18-8955s didn't work in this application on these carbs.
I'm out of time for today, so what we'll do is tomorrow we'll get the float bowls back put together. All the rest of it's going to get done off camera. Carbs are mostly done, and I'm going to get to that here in a second. As far as the main body of all the carbs, everything is done in that regards. I bench synced them. I've also put the choke cable on that goes from one side to the other. And before I did all that, I did a static fuel test, a 15-minute static fuel test with the auxiliary can on the bench, and no problems. So no leaking at the joints, no leaking at the float bowls. So with the results of those other float needles, the ones that were in there, being better, I can't really explain that, but they are better. They look brand new. Like I said, I was only going to change them out because of a good practice thing. I looked up the number, that 8955, and it is the correct one for the GL 1500C. So I can't really explain that one. Like I said, maybe manufacturing variances. I just got those not too long ago. But like I said, these look perfect. Put them back in. So we're running with it. So they're almost ready to go back in. Now, something I kind of missed on video 1 in regards to attributing problems. These guys right here on these carbs, there's one there. There is one there. So this one is for number 2, this tube right there. Now those are part of the emission control, I'm assuming, for the California bike, because they go to the purge valve. There were no hoses hooked up to them whatsoever, none. This is a direct feed right into the bore of the carb, the main bore of the carb. So it stands to reason that when this thing was running, especially at higher throttle, more airflow coming through this way, these are going to be picking up air as well, and maybe dirt and whoever knows what else. So the original owner may have been, so maybe they were thinking about doing a desmog and they stopped. I don't know. But we're not doing anything like that. This is not my bike, and I set these things up exactly the way the factory designed them to be set up. Now all these little hoses that go off of these ports I just showed you are supposed to go to this little octopus thing. So it's a 6-into-1, and then that one goes into the purge valve, into a port on the purge valve. We can set that up right here. I'll do all that off camera, but that was all missing. All the hoses and the little octopus thing was all missing. I went ahead and made one. I made it out of an old fuel tube that had it was a fuel T. I cut the T off, put it in the end, glued it in, and then made 6 aluminum tips to go into it and press them in. Not really press, but just a slip fit with some glue and then a piece of brass to cap the end off. So this will work fine. It's the right size to go into the hose on the purge valve. Kind of looks like a TV antenna, you know, or a telephone pole. So we're going to set that back up the way it was. You can say what you want about it, but like I said, this ain't my bike, number 1, and number 2, I set them up the way the factory is designing them to be and to meet whatever emissions were at that particular period, all right? Because it's not my bike. We're gonna do it to the book. Do it by the book, I should say. Well, it looks like something out of the movie Alien, but this is basically what it's gonna look like. I left all the hoses long because I'm not really sure how they're gonna play out once we put them in, because this pair valve, obviously you can see the fuel line sneaks in. The pair valve essentially pushes kind of everything down. It did it on the other one too, the old setup. And when you put the pair valve in, and it screws down into its spot, kind of pushes stuff down like that. Now there's plenty of slack in the fuel line. I made it long.
Yeah, place your bets. What are the chances that this is not going to be right?
Well, actually, I just duplicated the exact length of the old one, and that was a little bit on the long side. So there's plenty of it to go down and then clear, but it pushes down vent tubes and things like that, but I think it'll be fine. This I'm a little confused about still. It was originally hooked up to number 6 on that side. I can look it up by number because it's a number 10 tube and see what the service manual 10 and 11 it looks like. But this could be changed. Somebody may have messed around with them. So really at this point they're ready to go back in. I got smart though before I put these in. Well, actually right after I slid the carbs through, before I put, you know, any of the carb holders or any of this thing on, I took the tubes off the pair valve and put them down where they go on those reeds, and then put the hose clamp down where it's supposed to be, because it's really hard to get it now. I can get it up here no problem. Just slip the pair valve in, screw it down, run some hoses, clean up. I'll clean up these hoses first up top side here. These guys, the ones shown you before for the emissions and stuff. Like I said, I left them long for that reason. How I do these O-rings, because you probably saw that I already checked the bores again, or I should say the intakes. I take a little silicone grease, a pretty generous amount on each O-ring, put it up into the O-ring groove, then drop it down once I do all 3 on one side. And that silicone grease will hold it in place. All right, folks, we're almost ready. We have to wait for the band clamps. I don't have those yet, otherwise we'd be getting to the point where we can test fire this thing. Now, I know I'm gonna get feedback in the comment section on, oh, just delete all that crap, emissions crap. Well, I said before and I'll say it again, this is not my bike. And I wanna diagnose this thing as far as running, in the condition it came off the assembly line, and this is what it is right now. I've gotten all the hoses hooked up and all the valves and stuff hooked up. The valves are all tested as far as to make sure the diaphragm integrity is good so they're not inducing a vacuum leak. But this was an absolute mess. I showed you a couple things already on it, so I'll just kind of breeze over this. All right, those lines in there that go between each carb, those are the ones I was showing you before that I made that octopus for. Those go to the purge valve. It's kind of buried, but the valve in the front, called a CAV or a control valve vacuum, control air valve or something, this is the pair valve. Those little things I just showed you that go on the side of the carb here, that go to the little octopus, go to the purge valve. The valve in the front goes to the vents. You see the vents right here, the main vents you typically see on these carbs? So you got a vent joint and a vent T on each side, and one hose on the left bank and one hose on the right bank, and they go to that CAV valve in there. Now those hoses were there, those were hooked up properly. The vacuum impulse for that was incorrect, and there was no vacuum impulse back here on the purge valve. Purge valve goes straight to number 3 carb. There's a special vacuum, a nipple underneath it that powers only that as far as the vacuum impulse goes. The CAV valve gets split between that and the petcock, which is what this is right here. And that comes off of number 6. So number 6 goes to a T, then continues on to that CAV valve, and then goes up to the petcock. So that's how that's powered, if you will, or it's fed vacuum. So that's all correct, and this is waiting, of course, to go attached to the petcock, and here's our fuel line. So the fuel tank does not have a vented cap. It has a vent on the bottom of the tank that this hose connects to, so the tank vents through the purge valve, and that makes total sense considering like on your car, truck, or whatever, it does the same thing. It vents through the purge valve, or purge canister, and gets controlled by the purge valve. There's a lot more to it on these modern vehicles with the powertrain control modules and stuff. In simplified form, it's the same. So the tank gets vented through the canister, and then the valve opens and closes, however that works with the vacuum. I think is when the engine runs, it's just open. I think one valve is normally open, one valve is normally closed. I'm not really sure. They both hold vacuum as far as, actually all three of them, that's a pair valve. All the valves hold vacuum when you pull vacuum on their diaphragm nipples, so they are not going to induce a vacuum leak. But so essentially what that does, of course, it captures vapors from the tank so they don't go into the air, and then they eventually get burned in the engine, allegedly. The cab valve is pretty much the same thing because you got these tapped into the vacuum, or I'm sorry, vent tubes, not vacuum, the vent tubes on each carb. And so therefore they're doing the same thing as far as capturing, you know, gas vapor and then being able to take advantage of it to burn that. You know, in concert with the purge valve, they both work kind of the same. I don't know exactly the engineering on it. All I know is that the valves hold vacuum and everything is hooked up properly. This is a pair valve. The pair valve is like an EGR valve, exhaust gas recirculation valve, because it's connected to those reeds down in there you saw that are right off the exhaust ports and comes up through these tubes. And then the pair valve has been tested too, as far as the diaphragm goes. That is a different thing, but it's all part of the emissions. So again, this was an absolute disaster as far as how it was hooked up. But now we have our tank vent hose ready to go. Nothing wrong with the hose. I checked it all the way down. Petcock vacuum, fuel line. The remainder of any open manifold vacuum ports will get capped off. Well, they're actually capped off now. But when we first hooked this up to fuel and fire it up, I will have the vacuum synchronizer on. There's no sense in firing it up without it on. So all these other hoses will be disconnected temporarily for that. I mean, I could vacuum tee them in, but it's not that important. Once we get it synchronized in, we'll put it back. So that is a Reader's Digest version. Well, it's Reader's Digest in my book version of how this works and where we're at right now. So I'm probably not gonna be able to do any more today because I'm waiting on the mail. So I'll just go in and do some editing. So we'll catch you most likely tomorrow. All right, folks, I made a community post this morning actually that said that I was probably gonna be delayed on this video and getting this thing running. That was sort of accurate, but we're gonna do it anyway. I got it all buttoned back up. I've got, I kind of cobbled together the band clamps that I need because I had 4 of them. And so I just found some regular clamps that are narrow enough to go into those areas of the airbox. Anyway, I did make some other mistakes on the fuel hose routing in particular. We'll go into that later. Let's just go ahead and fire it up. And I got the synchronizer hooked up. And then we'll get it running really well, hopefully. And then we'll get into the goof ups I made and we can close this video out. There's not going to be any test ride. I'm going to end up having to take the airbox back out, and that's part what I'm going to explain to you here shortly. Fuel's on from my OSHA approved hanging, dangling, portable fuel cell arrangement. Make sure we're not spilling everywhere. I mean, we did static test it and do the other stuff. I don't know, the way my luck's been going on this job here. Anyway, I got to turn the idle. I'm not sure where the idle is because I had to take the idle screw out to clear that float bowl to get it out. So I'm just going to back this off. I don't know where it's at. Oh, hang on. I forgot to put the enricher cable back on. Well, somebody did. I wonder who that was. Here we go. Where's the key? Contact. Idle's probably way too low. Turn that up, baby. More. Here we go. All right, hold the phone. You know, I got to reshoot those clips. That first start attempt, I forgot to hook the coil up, which is the coil for 1 and 2. So that's why it was a little bit fudgy trying to get going. So let's try it now. I got it all hooked up. Actually, I've done a bunch of other stuff. I'm sorry about that. So this is kind of out of order, but you get the idea. That's badass, man. Nothing like a Valk 6, man. 1500. I gotta play with the slow screws a little bit more. I'm gonna go into that here in a little bit. What do you think of that, though, huh? Not too shabby. On a clip that I did shoot that unfortunately didn't have audio, this thing was having a D-cell backfire, D-cell pop. And that's with the carb tune hooked up. The carb tune, I think I'm gonna have at least maybe some accelerated clips of doing the synchronization, but it was hanging about right here. This video is getting all screwed up now because of my problems with audio and clips not being recorded. Ugh. So with the carb tune hooked up properly, doing 4 carbs at a time, and no open vacuum ports, this thing had a D-cell backfire when I came off the throttle. So I'd rev it up and it would go ba-da-ba-ba-ba-ba. Makes total sense though. Remember we had a problem with these guys, these hoses right here. Weren't capped off, no hoses going to them, nothing going to any sort of valve. They were wide open, all 6 carbs. That's how I found them. Well, when you do not have a vacuum impulse going to the purge valve, because these go to the purge valve, that valve is open. You got the same situation. It's just bypassing, it's not closing off. Same thing with the cav valve. Pretty sure on this one. I'm not 100% sure, but I'm pretty sure. This is the cav valve one that goes off the vents. No vacuum impulse going to it. Now I could have teed it off and done it that way, but there's carbs that have 2 impulses. Like for example, 3 and 4 provide the impulse for the cav valve. And I could have certainly worked around that. Not going to screw up, or not going to affect, I should say, or skew the synchronization at all, because as long as it's firing on a cylinder, that vacuum impulse is going to be what it is. Really, we don't have this coming into play too much until we have higher RPM and higher airflow, like when you rev it up and it comes back down. So I disconnected the carb tune because I didn't need it anymore, and then hooked all these up, and that's what you just heard. You know, that's not enough for you guys to hear. Let's do it a little walk around with it running. Running just like that, because now it's ported off correctly in regards to these things not being open when they're not supposed to be. So that makes total sense as far as that goes. I did some final tuning to the slows. At idle I had a slight partial miss, and I traced it down to this bank, the right bank, 135. You know, I just held my hand over the pipes. Yeah, I lost another clip. And I could feel it a little bit irregular on this side, but very regular over there. And these 3 are the hardest ones to get to as far as with my with my Motion Pro tool. Gee whiz, too much carbon monoxide. Tried number 3 first and adjusted that one. It made no difference. Then I went to number 1 and opened it up maybe a quarter turn more, because I couldn't really be sure how much I had adjusted it before, because I had a very poor feel on that one, and it smoothed right out. So that was number 1 that was the problem. Then I brought this one back to where it was. I turned it back in 2 clicks. So this one went out 2 clicks, this one went out 2 clicks, and back 2 clicks. So they all should be about the same. Well, while we're over here, radiator cap is leaking, it's dripping down. This cap is bad. I've already ordered one, so we'll put a cap on for him too. No test riding because I got to take the airbox back off. Why? I have a fuel line problem. Let me show you real quick. Not really a problem. This is a temporary fix. I had to reroute these fuel lines, and I put a splice in this left side one, the one that goes to the 246 side, because it wasn't long enough. Because some, smarty pants thought that all the hoses went underneath the paravalve and so forth when I had the carbs over on the table there, and I was pushing that paravalve down, saying, "Oh yeah, well the old ones went this way, so it must be right." that was an assumption that should never have been made. So when I tried to put the air box in, those fuel lines going underneath, even though they're quite long between the two banks, just wouldn't fit, just not enough room. And I'm like, well, what the hell?
What the hell?
When you do that, what do? You induce a dip in the fuel line in the center where the T is. So now the fuel's got to climb up each side to get into the banks, which is a no bueno. So I said, no problem, I'll just bring it out and bring it down from the top. So I disconnected and tried to do that, but no way, because I had cut this side to fit lengthwise. I made it the same length as the other one. Never assume that the original crap that you're taking off is exactly right, especially hose lengths. Shouldn't have done that. I should have just left it run long and then figured it out when I put the carb rack in. And then, you can get at these T's no problem, which is what I'm going to do. Again, I got to take the air box out. I've already ordered a new hose from Partzilla. I'm not going to leave it this way. I would never leave something like that. I'd never be able to stop thinking about it. So we're going to fix that with a new hose and then get that right. I've also got two of the proper band clamps coming to get rid of these, because I had 4 of them. There's 6 of them sitting up in Massachusetts right now from Z1 Enterprises. The tracking has them essentially lost. So I don't know why they're up in Middlesex, Mass, but somebody had one job and they didn't do it. I'm going to do my job and get this right. Sounds real good now. May have to adjust those again, but like I said before, I will do that after I do it on a test ride. Alright folks, that's going to be it on this video. So only 2 parts to this repair. It's unusual for me, but it didn't need as much as the other ones. Like, I'm not doing any brakes or anything like that. I'm real happy with the way this thing runs. I mean, this thing runs really sweet. So sorry we can't take it for a test ride. I wish we could. Maybe you'll see another test ride, or who knows, maybe if it sticks around long enough, I will do a really quick clip and put it up as a short. Don't know yet, but you have to stick around to find out. So you know what you need to do. If you're so inclined, I would really appreciate it if you like the video, share it with your friends, subscribe, ring the bell, you get notified when I put more crap like this up. As always, thanks for watching. Don't just repair, restore. Catch you on next video.